So, Marie, you've been in Kelowna for only about a year.
A year, yes.
Tell us the story of how you got to Kelowna.
The story of getting to Kelowna. Well, I've lived up on Big White Mountain for 6 years previously.
Okay.
And there were lots of reasons. We were living in Australia, and I had probably the biggest hit of where we should move and where we should be going to was a conversation I had with 10 people in a row, and they changed the subject from what we were talking to Canada. 10 people in a row. So I was driving home on my way home from work, and a car pulled out in front of me, and I had to slam my brakes on not to bump into them. And they had a bumper car sticker saying I'd rather be skiing in Whistler. And I was like, okay, I think I'm getting signs from the universe that we're supposed to be making a move to Canada. So we went home. We'd been living in Australia for 12 years, and we literally started the process of applying for migration to Canada. Yeah. And we moved in January, 17 years ago, probably almost to the date, which is kind of bizarre. Right. 7 years ago, almost to the date. And we arrived with 6 suitcases, 2 kids, went straight up to Big White and stayed there. Yeah.
And Canada, like Australia, is a huge country. So why Big White? What made you? Because of skiing?
Yeah, well, we researched. We'd always wanted to do a year on a ski resort, and we didn't actually know at that point when we came whether we could stay in Canada or not because we hadn't received our full migration status. So we wanted to hang out somewhere where we could just stay for a season and see what happened, where we didn't really need a car, and Big White had the school there, and we had 2 kids. So it was kind of a no-brainer that Big White was amazing ski in, ski out, school close by, and it ticked all the boxes for us.
Very nice. And what made you decide to come down into the city?
A few reasons, mostly because the school was too small. Like the boys have been in the school up there for 5 years, and it only goes up to grade 9. Oh, okay. So it's not good to have a 13 and 15-year-old on the mountain board.
Right.
It's like time to move and get them in a bigger school.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that was the major reason.
And you spent how long writing a book? You just completed it yesterday.
Yeah, I did. I completed it at 1 o'clock in the morning. Wow. My first draft. Yeah, I'm pretty excited.
Nice. How long did you spend? So there's the writing process, but then the concept, is it something you've been mulling for a long time?
Yeah, at least 3 years. Wow. Like the 3 years I've been putting programs together and learning and re-educating myself, and just it's been with me for 3 years. So I've been plugging into it and just dropping seeds here and there, but it's taking till now to come to fruition.
Do you have a title?
Yeah, the Metatrans Code.
Metatrans Code. So what is the Metatrans Code? You started to draw a diagram. Maybe you could do it again, draw it and explain it. Absolutely. And then we're going to post, whenever it's ready, we'll post a visual graphical,
absolutely. So. Metatrans Code is the shape of the Metatrans cube is actually sacred geometry. Okay. And at the time when I first started downloading, as I say, this information, I didn't realize it was a Metatrans cube at all. It was like I had to learn one process at a time. So initially, I was led to understand that in the center of a cell is the cellular memory, the cellular information. And inside the center of the cell, there's 6 things: a belief, an observation, a perception, an internalization, an externalization, or a judgment.
Okay.
And then the cellular memory kind of like has this information cast out into like all of the bodies. So it goes into your mental bodies and your neuro-linguistic programming, so it becomes your automatic goal. It drops into your physical body, so it's stored somewhere in your body, and if it's a unhelpful belief, it will cause an ailment in that area of your body at some point. Sits in your emotional body, so you have to look at the feelings and how you feel about that belief, observation, perception, and then it goes into a spiritual body. So we actually need the understanding of what the reasoning is around this core belief and where it started. So there's 2 ways the core information can start. One, we can perceivably bring it forward. I say perceivably because I work with timelines, and we will drop into past lives, perceived past lives occasionally, to go to the cellular information where it's carried forward from. And some people say, do you believe in past lives? And I'm like, I don't really I don't really have an opinion about that. It's like, it is what it is. If it helps people, it helps people. I know it's helped me to drop into some perceived past lives, so I can actually get some understanding of where we are now. So then we have an internal representation of what this belief is. So we see ourselves a certain way. And then we have an external representation of how we show ourselves to the world and how we externalize that representation of this belief. And all of these bodies entangle. And I see it like a spider's web, like it can get very messy. And then we actually cast out to people, things like objects, places, like your environment, to support us in this core belief. And they become entangled also. So it looks when I see it in my mind's eye like a spider's web, but it's actually the simple beauty and the complex beauty of a Metatron's cube. And when it sits in the pattern of a Metatron's cube, it just creates. The universe doesn't care whether it's helpful or unhelpful. It just is. Once it's in this process, it just creates. And then it creates over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And this is where the patterns come into play.
Right.
Where we start to see why is that same thing happening around money? Why is that same thing happening around relationships? Why is that same thing happening around work?
Right. So some beliefs are helpful and some are not helpful.
Totally.
And some are undesirable to us.
Totally.
So we kind of, I know the experience of kind of feeling like you have a conflict, like you want to quit smoking, for example, but you keep doing it. You want to be a better public speaker, but you are shy and introverted.
Absolutely.
So there's kind of an internal conflict.
Well, we take our programming directly into the subconscious mind, mostly between the ages of 0 and 7. So in that state, we're in the state of theta all the time. So 90% of our programming comes from that time. And 70% of the things that we do on a daily basis runs off our automatic programming.
Right.
So it's like you can see it in other people first, where you see other people tripping themselves up and you're like, why do you do that? I can see it in them. When you start to see it in others, then you start to question, well, if I can see a pattern in their behavior, is there a pattern in my behavior? And that's when you start dropping into the willingness of seeing your own patterns of behavior and where you're tripping yourself up and sabotaging yourself. Yeah.
So I guess the first step is awareness of what's happening.
Yeah.
And then how do we go about changing some of these internal beliefs?
Yeah, it's tricky because you have to get back into the subconscious mind, right?
Okay.
So I do have a process that I've just written about and put into a book that I finished at 1 a.m. last night, my first draft anyway. So there is a process that I take people through where we actually go into the cellular information and we drop into each one of the 6 bodies. And we, my understanding is if that we don't look after the belief in all 6 bodies, then eventually it will come back because it's still present somewhere.
Right.
Whereas if we replace it, and we always replace it with something that's helpful and can move you forward.
Nice.
Right? So there is a process, and I have written about it, but right now it's me. Yeah.
When did you first discover this concept?
Honestly, it's been, I say, dropping in for the last 6 years. 6 years. I went through a whole year where I was walking at like 5 o'clock in the morning and I ran the mountain every single day. Like 5 o'clock in the morning, I'd run all the way up to the top of the mountain. I'd be completely on my own at the top of the mountain. Like, it was just beautiful. And during that time, I downloaded a lot of information.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you've been able to reverse health conditions with this. So what is the connection between your health and these internal beliefs in your subconscious?
This is where it gets really smart, right? So we have the beliefs that we can bring forward from our previous life, but we've also got something called epigenetics that Dr. Bruce Lipton talks about, and he discovered the whole thing about epigenetics. And epigenetics is it comes along a familial line, so it can be from your mother's side or your father's side, and my understanding is that it goes through 7 generations. So if it is in a genetic line, we actually drop it into it, detaching the 7 generations and healing it for all time.
Right.
I had a client where she had a belief, and the belief was brought forward, and it was in a mother's line and it was in a father's line. Like, she wasn't getting past that belief on her own. No way. So with my process, like I'd like people to understand what they can do so they can do it themselves. They're not dependent on anybody doing it with them. But for some of the beliefs, sometimes we can't get to them because they're in our subconscious. Sometimes we need somebody to help us hold space to get to that core belief, and then we can let it go easily. Right? This process doesn't need to be hard. I think years ago, like everybody would go through changing beliefs, and it would be a hard process and long process and painful process. And it's not like that anymore. Things are speeding up and getting quicker and quicker and quicker.
Right.
When I first started my regressional hypnosis, it used to take me 2 hours to take a client through a session. Now I can drop somebody in like 5 minutes.
Because you're getting better at the process.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's because I'm healing the things in me, I have more space. So it enables space for the other person. And also I think it's collective consciousness. I think there's more and more people are waking up and starting to raise their own vibrations. So I think it helps that things are speeding up in that way as well.
So tell us about hypnosis. This is part of, so you said you take people through a process of hypnosis. Tell us a little bit about hypnosis for those that don't know. Some people are really scared of it. They're like, you're not going to make me look like a chicken and run around the kitchen. And I'm like, no, I don't do that at all. Thank you, but no. It's really not about that, is it?
No, not at all. We're in a hypnosis state a lot of the time. Like when people get scared about being in hypnosis because they think they're going to be out of control, and they're never out of control. They will only do whatever they want to do. These people that go up to the stage, they are the exhibitionists. They wouldn't do that stuff if they really didn't want to.
Right.
So hypnosis is actually relatively safe, and your mind will only take you to a place that's safe. It really takes care of you. It really protects you in the hypnosis. But like when you drive in your car and you're driving a long distance and all of a sudden you lose like a few kilometers and you're like, I can't remember going past that turning.
Right.
You're literally in a state of hypnosis then.
Yes.
You're in that trance state, right? Where you just zone out.
And I would say television watching.
Totally.
People are in a state of hypnosis
totally.
too. And that's what I try to tell my kids. Like, it's really important what you watch.
Yeah.
And it can't just be entertaining. Because, eating junk food, I compare it to eating junk food. Like,
Absolutely.
It may taste delicious and it's fun. But if you're eating that all the time, you're going to be in bad shape. And I think what we take into our brains on a continuous basis affects our attitude, our spirituality, our, demeanor, everything.
We are, there is definitely a hypnosis state that you go into when you're watching TV. And it's like, when you get into that Netflix binge and it gets to the third episode and it's like, are you still watching?
Yeah.
It's like,
even you forget what time it is.
Even Netflix is judging you at that point. It's like, hey, wake up. Wake up and do something else, right?
Yeah.
But that form can also be a form of escapism, which is not a bad thing if occasionally you need to escape.
Yes.
But if you're doing it on a regular basis, then you're doing it to numb out, and it's like TV and shopping and internet browsing and social media and eating, drinking, drugs, whatever it is. That's all part of an escapism, just to escape the mess that you've created for yourself within yourself.
Right. So when you get a person into a hypnotic state, it's for a purpose.
Oh, totally. And I take people really lightly now. Like I understand how cautious people are about that process. And there's no point me telling you what your belief is and telling you what the experience is that you've had. It's better for you to experience it. Once you experience it yourself. So I keep people light enough to be able to remember that experience and go through that experience if they choose.
Right.
Some people forget the belief altogether. And it happens with me. Like when I work with other people, I immediately forget what the process was with them and myself. I don't retain that information.
I see.
So people will say to me, do you remember when we worked on this? And I'm like, no, you're going to have to remind me. But it's a safety mechanism for me, right? It's not okay for me to store everybody else's processes.
Right.
And it's also safer for them. You just let it all disintegrate.
Right. So is it fair to say it's like observing something and then it dissolves once you've seen it? So can we take a real life example? Like, let's say someone has an eating disorder or, some kind of insecurity.
Yeah.
And then they get is it like a vision? Like they become aware of their parents or?
Yes. I tap into it myself and I receive the information intuitively. But I also make sure that the other person intuits it as well. So I'll teach somebody how to muscle test to get their own answers.
Okay.
Because I can tell you what your beliefs are, but that doesn't help you at all.
Right.
I'm not a healer. I facilitate you healing yourself.
Right.
Anybody that says they're a healer, it's old school stuff. We facilitate the healing in you, and I heal the judgment in me, and that's how we heal. I lost my train of thought then.
So we become aware of what is going on internally, and then sometimes that's enough.
Awareness is the key, right? Because 90% of the time we're running off automatic programming, it's just on automatic. So it's just happening without us paying attention. It's like our body, all of our organs are doing millions of things each day, but we don't pay attention to it, right?
Right.
And that's part of the problem, that we're not paying attention. So the patterns get bigger and bigger and bigger and louder and louder and louder and more uncomfortable until you're saying, okay, I can't stand another moment of having that same mistake happen with money, relationships, business. Right. It's usually the same things, right? Money, relationship, business. And at that point, it's kind of like a wake-up moment. It's a aha moment where you're like, okay, I need to do something.
Right.
Yeah. And then at that point, you've got a choice. You've got a choice to be willing to go get some help and work through some of these things.
Yeah.
Or you've got a choice just to numb out more.
Do some people find it a painful experience to delve that deeply in the subconscious?
Initially, yes. When you first start doing your work to clean out your beliefs, it can be painful to drop into that experience, but only for a matter of minutes. And isn't it better to experience that pain for minutes rather than the lifetime of pain you've been putting yourself through?
Yeah. I liken it to taking off a Band-Aid. I remember as a kid, my parents left me alone for long periods of time. Right. And I used to ride my bicycle with just shorts on, no shoes, no shirt. And I wiped out on some dust going around a corner and I scraped the entire front of my body. So nobody was home. So I found a huge box of Band-Aids and I put about 78 Band-Aids all over my body to cover this scrape. And of course, my mom saw that and she's like, you got to take that off. And I didn't want to take it off, but it would have got infected and everything else.
Yes.
And it was a little painful, but only for a couple of minutes. Yeah. But as a kid, you're like, oh my God, no, don't touch it. Like
find when I'm working with people, I'll always test their willingness. If they're willing to go into that process, then it's fairly easy. If they're not willing, I'll just say, okay, let's gift wrap that and put it onto a shelf and we'll come back to it.
Right.
There's no point pushing somebody through something they're not willing to do. It's
right.
And there's no judgment on that. If there's a belief there and you're not quite ready, your body will protect you, your mind will protect you and say, hey, it's not safe to go there.
It's not time.
It's not time. Let's just we're aware of it now. And then you usually find that over a matter of a couple of days, a couple of weeks, then because you're already aware of it, it starts to rise to the surface then, right? And it's like, okay, now I'm ready to be looked at.
Right.
Yeah, so it's a very gentle process. We make sure we take care of everybody.
And typically, how many sessions does a person need to do before they uncover what they need to uncover?
We uncover a belief every time, but like something with, like you were saying today, earlier about bigger chunks, like smoking, for example, people want to give up the habit of smoking. Well, it's not just that one thing of giving up smoking. There's all the beliefs around it. Why are you smoking in the first place? So we can go through a process where we have you think about not smoking, but what are you going to replace it with? You have to look at the core beliefs around the worthiness and the lack of connection. All addictions are lack of connection.
Right.
No exception. It's all lack of connection. So
connection to other humans or to the environment or any
connection to self. Connection to self first, others, and your environment, right? We need material things to replace nature because we don't spend enough time in nature. So we think material things are going to fill that void, and they don't. Right? So the lack of connection with self, with nature, with our intuition, that's the first thing that hurts us, right? And then because we've lost our connection with ourselves, then we lose our connection with others, and then we lose our connection with nature, and then we need something to fill us up, and we're trying to fill this void that can't be filled. It can only be filled by reconnecting with your soul.
Right. I wonder what you think of this concept. I've heard it said that addictions are different than insecurities, but I don't believe that. I think everything is, when looked at, negative things that we do to ourselves, they're all kind of addictions. The reason I say that is because it's hormones, and people can be addicted to anger.
Absolutely.
They can be addicted to rage. They can be addicted to feeling sorry for themselves, like, oh, I can't speak in front of people, I'm an introvert. And you're getting a chemical reaction of some kind in the brain, and that becomes addictive, even if it's negative.
Absolutely.
And it's a chemical reaction in the brain that we're, repeating over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in a way, it's similar to a cigarette addiction, because people say, well, that's different because it's a chemical, it's an addiction, and people don't believe it has anything to do with their beliefs.
And you're absolutely right. It starts with the insecurities, right? So it starts very young. Like I have a lifetime of hypertension that resulted in adrenal fatigue and hypothyroidism, and I had to go and clean all of that up. But it started very young with people pleasing. People pleasing is an addiction.
Right.
It was like I'm an empath, so I tried to take on everybody's stuff. That didn't work. I'll try and please people. That doesn't work. I'll try and help people. That doesn't work. I started biting my nails young, and then started smoking at 14, and then drinking, and and those addictions start at a very young age, and it is an insecurity that leads to the addiction. And I actually have a belief that if we lose belief, if we lose a strong belief in self, others, or a higher power as a child, we will go through an addiction process, and we have to spiral all the way down to shame, and then gap our way back up again.
Right.
Because the people that seem to have a strong belief in either themselves, others, or a higher power, it doesn't matter whether it's God, Buddha, whatever, a universal law, but the ones that have a strong belief bounce back. They will drop down into the shame, but they bounce back. They don't drop into addictions.
Right. Yeah.
So it's all about that connection.
Yeah. Because I remember I used to have a bit of a bad temper.
Yeah.
And it, thinking back on it, it really was an addiction, because you think, well, why would you do that? It's got negative consequences and so on. But I do remember I would temporarily feel good and relieved.
Yes.
And I kind of compare it to smoking, because everybody I know that's trying to quit smoking, they're like, I hate it. I hate it. But for a brief moment, you feel a sense of relief.
Yes.
That addiction pulls you into it. And there's a temporary, relief, and then you feel bad.
The thing around anger is that people are we're as a collective, we're so judgmental about anger. And anger is a much higher vibration than shame. It's a much higher vibration than guilt. So anger is actually not necessarily a bad thing, because you can use anger to motivate you up through the conscious states into willingness. And when you're in willingness, then you can start to make the improvements. Anger is not always a bad thing. It's just that we judge it as bad, and then we label it as bad, and then we beat ourselves up because we've been angry, and it's like, and then it becomes a massive thing. It becomes this big elephant in the room that if you just popped the elephant, like, it would be a tiny mouse.
Right.
It's okay to use anger sometimes to motivate us through to the next level.
Sure.
It's just when we stay in the anger and we project it towards others. And if we're projecting anger towards ourselves, we're projecting anger towards others.
Yes.
It doesn't matter.
Well, let's explore that a little bit, because for me, it was feeling like I was being taken advantage of for a long time, and I was very passive aggressive. I would let it happen, and I would tell myself things like, see, I knew that was going to happen.
Right.
And then eventually I would kind of explode on the person. So my sense of it was an overreaction, like it was inappropriate overreaction. So I understand what you're saying. Like, anger is sometimes, quite often, an appropriate emotion, but I think the way I handled it was not appropriate. Like, I let it build up instead of being assertive and saying, listen, this is unacceptable. I would let, people take advantage of me, at least in my head, and then I would explode.
Yeah, absolutely.
In anger. So it feels inappropriate.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, you're only angry with yourself because you didn't listen to yourself
previously,
weeks before, when you were saying, hey.
Yeah, right.
And it's that lack of connection when you weren't listening to yourself saying, hey, you be careful here.
Right.
You just go on blindly ignoring it, and then you have to get smashed.
Right. And then you explode. So maybe give us an example of where anger is totally appropriate. Because we do have a lot of shame around anger, but it is a normal human emotion.
Like anger is really a good motivator to get you through to the next level of consciousness. Like if you're like, it will raise you out of shame. It will raise you out of guilt. It will get you through to the next level.
Right.
Right. So, and it's also a response, right? We can drop into anger out of protection mode. It can be responsive. Like, it's not healthy to have an anger state all the time.
Right.
It will produce those chemicals that your brain will get addicted to, and it'll get used to creating those chemicals, and it will become the norm state.
Right.
So that your brain searches out experiences to start recreating that chemical because you're getting a high off it, right? So it's not that it's good long term, and it certainly doesn't have any health benefits at all. Yeah. But occasionally anger can motivate you into something bigger.
Yeah. I've heard David Data explain it like this. Like, if your child, you walk into the room and your child is about to drink bleach, you're not going to say, look, let's sit down and have a talk about this. You grab them and you're like, no, like, absolutely. Right? You know, it's a righteous kind of anger, but it's because you love them. It's not, it's not like flying off the handle for no reason.
Absolutely. You know? And in that moment, it will motivate you to move super quickly so there's no harm.
And hopefully teach a powerful lesson. Like, that is not, same with if they're wandering into traffic, you kind of, don't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see it from both perspectives. Like, from the parent's perspective, yes, of course, they need to make sure their child is safe. But from the child's perspective, they don't know what they're doing wrong at that point. Right. And that's usually the start of kids shutting down.
Right.
They're like, oh, okay, I was running to play. You're running out into the traffic. They don't know. They're just playing. Yeah. We're playing Tig here, Mum, right? I'm playing with you. And then they get shouted at for playing. Yes. From their perspective, and they start to shut down. Yeah. From the parent's perspective, they're saving their life for running across the car park. Right? In an ideal world, we would be non-reactionary to everything, but we're humans. Right. Yeah. We're humans, and we're working 90% of this programming that we've built up between the ages of 0 and 7. Yeah. Right. So we have to forgive ourselves for that. Forgiveness is a huge key. It's part of who we are. And
I think explaining to the child why you had that reaction, because I love you. I don't want you to drink the bleach. Like,
please don't.
And I love you, hugs and right. So they don't think you're just randomly flying off the handle for no reason, right? Yeah. But it is a challenge. Yeah. So you've got two.
I've got boys. 2 boys. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got 2 girls. Yeah. So, yeah. What else can you tell us about this book? I'm really excited to read it. When do you think it'll be ready for publication?
I'm hoping it'll be finished by March. I'm hoping it'll be ready to go by March.
Do you are you going to do the subsequent drafts yourself, or do you have proofreaders?
I've just finished the first draft. I have got an editor that I'm working with, and also that I will be working with. I haven't engaged her yet, and also a publisher that's local. She's just set up a business publishing. She's been in publishing world for a while, and so I think my people are lining up for me.
That's great. That's really nice. I always say in business, it's all about relationships and connecting with the right people that share at least part of your vision.
Yeah, it was important for me to have people that understood the process, and I put a request out to the universe that would happen, and that's what's happening. My graphic designer understands this intimately. Nice. The editor that I've been speaking to understands it intimately. My publisher understands it intimately. I do a session with all of them, then they understand the work, right? Yeah. And I find when you work with somebody, you really get to know them. Mm-hmm. It's beautiful.
Wonderful. Oh, tell us about the mountain challenge that you did.
The mountain challenge, yeah. As I said before, woken at like 5 o'clock every morning, between 5 and 5:30, and I would immediately jump out of bed and start running up the mountain. So I lived at.
And why did you do that?
It was guidance. So I started off walking and running, for my own health challenges. Like, I literally got to the point where I had the crash. I call it the crash. Mm. It's like if we don't start taking care of these beliefs on our own, then the universe kind of pushes into a moment where you have to make a choice. Yeah. And I'd been pushed into that moment where I had to make a choice. So I had to start making lifestyle changes throughout everything. And I started working on my mental body first with neuro-linguistic programming and doing my practitioner's course, and spent a year working on myself and my master practitioner course, and spending a year working on my own toxic thoughts and reframing and shifting my thoughts so that I was being more helpful towards myself. And then I had to start taking care of my physical body. So I started running the roads initially and walking, running. And then I received the guidance that I needed to go further. And I was like, well, there's only up. So that's what I did. So every morning I'd be walking and I would jump out of bed and I'd start up the mountain. Usually by 6:30 on the morning, I'd be on the top of the mountain totally on my own. Right. And people would say, can I come and join you? And I'm like, no.
That's your alone time.
No excuses. That's my alone time. So in the summer, I went up the mountain, and in the winter, I had a track that I would do at 5:00 in the morning, totally on my own. Beautiful. It was an amazing time. So my youngest son said to me, "Well, do you want to join the chairlift challenge?" Which was a run to the top of every chairlift.
At Big White.
Big White, yeah. And I was like, well, I'm doing it every day. We might as well. Let's do it. So we signed up together and we set off running, and halfway up he's vomiting and like, how do you do this every day? Because of course it's at super high elevation and it's really quite grueling. It's steep and it's rocky and there's no clear pathway. But we completed it. I had a challenge on the way back down. It's interesting, when I was doing the journey on my own, I had a tree that I would stop at, and it was my tree, and I'd stop and communicate with it and meditate with it and just stay in this spot for a while just to still myself. And the chairlift challenge was the opposite direction. So the tree was on the way down, not on the way up. And I just got to the point where I was like, where is my tree? And I was right at it. But at that moment, I went over on my ankle and I sprained my ankle really badly. And I just sat for a minute thinking, where are the coincidences? How can this be such a coincidence? The synchronicities in this, I have to pay attention. It's at my tree on the only day when I've got people around me that can get me down the mountain, right? I was totally looked after in that. So I sent my son on and said, you carry on, because he was checking his time. Like, we wanted to get under two hours to complete the race. So I said, you can't continue. Let me just sit for a minute. So I had a communication with my ankle and said, okay, I know that you've got a message for me, but just let me finish this race. Just move to one side and I'll promise I'll come back to you, right? So I made a deal with my body that I would go in and have a communication with the cells after the race, and got up and found I could stand on it, and then I could start walking, and then I started running, and I finished the race in 1:45.
Wow. And do you think, and I'm just going to ask you a totally frank question, but do you think it made the ankle worse by continuing the race?
Absolutely not, because the interesting thing is, because I didn't ignore it, I actually went into it.
You acknowledged it.
I acknowledged it. I wrapped it up as soon as we'd finished, and then I went home and did the work on it around the beliefs that what it was coming up from me with. Nice. I used my own process to work on it. So no, I actually think it cleared better, and within 2 days I was right again. I could start running the mountain again. So the week after that, I kind of got this epiphany of how we could communicate with ourselves and our body, and how it helped, and how the beliefs was also in our physical as well as in our mental body. And a week after, I burnt my arm on the element of the oven. As I was putting something in the oven, my arm stuck to the element, and it was really quite a sore burn. So I thought, well, this is an opportunity for me to go into what I've been gifted. So I ran it under cold water, and then I went and sat in my room and said, just give me an hour. Just leave me alone for an hour. And I just went and sat in my room and just kept dropping into the pain and letting it sear and letting it sear and letting it sear, and getting right into the center of where the pain was. And then I'd ease off a bit, and then I'd go back into it and go back into it and go back into it. And I would continuously did that for about 2 hours. It wasn't the most comfortable experience, but the next day I had a tiny red mark on my arm. The burn was completely healed.
I've heard there's an author that I love. His name is Shinzen Young, and he's a meditation expert. He's Japanese-American. He was trying to be a scientist. He failed. Then he decided to become a Buddhist monk. Right. And he went to a monastery. Do you know him?
No.
Do you know what I'm talking about? But he talks all about meditation, and what you've described is what he describes as, advanced meditation that he teaches to cancer patients and so on. That really, even if you can't cure something, you can really reduce the suffering.
Absolutely.
Just by, allowing it and experiencing it fully for as long as it takes.
I look at it this way, like we've got this body of cells and there's like millions and millions of cells in our body. They all have their own intelligence and their own memory. And we're like the queen of our cells, but we don't communicate with them. So it's kind of like having a ruler that doesn't communicate with you. So I start my morning every morning by looking in the mirror and saying, "Good morning, Marie. Good morning, cells. How are you doing?
Right.
Thanks for repairing me during the night while I slept, and thanks for waking up." And my body responds to that because it knows that it's not being ignored.
Yeah.
When we ignore something, it deteriorates quicker than even projecting unhelpful thoughts.
Mm-hmm. To put it into context, when was the mountain race and when was the incident with the stove?
Oh, just a week. There was like a week between.
A week between. And so how long ago was that?
Chairlift Challenge, was it 2 or 3 years ago?
2 or 3 years ago. I can't remember.
Was it 2 or 3 years ago, yeah.
So it's interesting how incidents in life that many people view as kind of tragedy can actually teach us so much.
Everything is happening for us, right? Bear in mind, like 2 years before I did the Chairlift Challenge, I was obese. I had lost all my connections. I was drinking a bottle of wine a night. I was totally unhealthy. I couldn't lift my head off the sofa after 5 o'clock at night because my adrenal fatigue was so bad. The only thing that got me through that was a glass of wine, literally. Yeah. And that's typical for adrenal fatigue, that people will crave alcohol because it makes you feel normal.
I see.
So within that space, like I literally woke up one morning and was like, I'm going to die. I'm not going to survive this. I'm not going to get through this. I can't do it. And my body had stopped producing cortisol by 10 o'clock in the morning. The doctor said to me, you shouldn't have been able to move after midday. So it was pure force getting me through the day, all day. But of course that had a detrimental effect on my adrenals and on my thyroid. And when I was diagnosed hypothyroidism, the doctor said, well, you're on medication for the rest of your life now. And I said, yeah, that's an interesting belief. I choose not to take it. And he just laughed and said, oh, you're one of those, are you? And I was like, yeah, I'm one of those. But I haven't taken any medication for 3 years. And I get my levels tested every year.
Nice. And you're very healthy.
I think I'm very healthy.
You look great.
I'm happy.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Marie. Last question. Who would you like to nominate?
Oh, I've got so many people to nominate.
All right. Well, let's start.
Well, the 2 people that are come to mind today, I'm actually spending some time with today, and I'm actually doing a talk with them for BWB.
Oh, nice.
So you know Shauna from BWB.
Yes.
She's definitely need to interview her.
She's been on the show already.
Right. You probably know all of these then. And Kasia, that I'm spending time today.
Kasia has been too.
And Chris Patton.
And Chris Patton has too.
She has too.
Yeah, all 3 of them have.
And my publisher is Pamela Lynch.
Oh, great.
And she's a law of attraction coach as well.
Okay, Pamela Lynch. Does she have a company, just in case, like we're going to...
Alicia Publishing.
Alicia Publishing.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And as for the 3, Kasia and Chris and Shauna,
yes.
I would like to interview them again in 2019 because I feel the quality of the show has greatly improved.
Nice.
I think Chris was like the 2nd or 3rd
interview
I did.
Yeah.
And to me, it felt a little bit scripted and robotic, So once you do 100 interviews,
it's totally different.
Right?
Everything changes. And Shauna's doing a wellness weekend in April that all 3 of us will be there actually. We're actually doing a conversational piece at the end of January with BWB. Kasia, Chris and I are doing like a conversation. We discovered that people are falling away from doing workshops and they want to be more involved in their own healing process, their own discoveries, right? So we're actually opening up a conversation so everybody can get involved and talk at the same time.
Very nice. Okay. So we'll put links to all of that.
Yes, please.
And that's great.
Yeah.
Marie, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation.
Awesome. Hey.
Luke Mankus is a realtor. He loves what he does. We asked Luke if he had any regrets about moving here in 2011. And he always says, yeah, one regret. And that is, he didn't move here sooner. When Luke came here, he didn't know anyone. He didn't know the neighborhoods or anything or anyone besides his daughter, who was 6 years old at the time. So he knows what it's like. Now, he's an expert and has helped well over 100 single people, couples, families, and investors with their real estate needs in the Okanagan. If you're new to our beautiful city, Luke can help you get connected with great lawyers, dentists, carpenters, landscapers, swimming pool installers, you name it. And whether you're new to Kelowna or not, Luke knows real estate. He can help you find a great property, negotiate a good deal, and hold your hand all the way through the process until the day you get your shiny new set of keys. Luke is known as a no-pressure kind of guy. He's had clients where it took even a year or more to get them into a property. He just doesn't believe in rushing things. On the other hand, when you decide it's time to act, he's diligent and he'll work day and night until the job is done. Give Luke Mankus a call or a text message at any time. 778-215-4273. Again, that's 778-215-4273. 778-215-4273 to chat with Luke about real estate.